often sat in front of a text, a kind of important letter or something, and I'll write it many, many, many times and try something out and copy and paste and whatever. We get used to, with great music, we kind of think that didn't happen. We know it did, but we just think it somehow couldn't be any other way, and it's kind of set. And yet, I think it makes it even more exciting once we realize how hard a composer, even a composer as great as Beethoven, really worked to make that music as great as it is. And right now we have the chance to look at his workshop and share that with you, where we're going to actually look at the manuscript and see how much more information there is in there and how much more feeling of what he was going through making that music. And you can be part of that. You're going to be part of that.
You know, the Greek poet Kavafis, speaking of writing letters, in his prose poem, The Boat, said that the trip from imagination to the blank page is a long and perilous one. And I'm always fascinated to know what that trip might have been like for Beethoven. You see, all too frequently we treat the masterpieces of classic music like the great architectural monuments of antiquity. They are set in stone and that is it. But in reality, when we perform, when we analyze, where we teach composition based on these works, we are looking at someone else's interpretation, the interpretation of the editor, which, albeit scientific and erudite and well-searched, it is an interpretation. And I'm always wondering, what would our view be like if we came into direct contact with the manuscript itself?
Well, let's do that.
Hello and welcome to Jordan Hall at New England Conservatory, one of the most beautiful performance spaces in Boston. I'm Stratis Minekakis, and I teach theory and composition here at New England Conservatory.
Hi, I'm Nick Kitchen. I'm in the Borromeo String Quartet, which is the quartet in residence at the New England Conservatory of Music. We're involved in all kinds of teaching here at the conservatory. I teach our respective instruments, chamber music, interpretation classes that cover many, many different instruments. We feel very lucky to be part of such a vibrant conduit for the development of creativity in music. It's kind of startling to look at generation after generation of students and really contemplate how gifted these individuals are and how important this time is where they really can drink in all of that information which is going to stay with them for the rest of their musical careers. The Borromeo Quartet uses computers to read our music because it allows us to see the complete score. We have a PDF file that's on the computer. We turn the pages with a homemade foot pedal that allows us to have all the parts, all 4 parts in our case, but it could be many more parts. Could be an orchestral score, could be any kind of score. We see all those parts, all of us see all of those parts, and we work on it that way. This has been a profound change in the way that we work. It has also opened the door to studying original manuscripts. It's very ironic that it can be so harmless to an original manuscript to have a PDF made of it, and we can spend hour after hour working directly with a PDF of Beethoven's manuscript or Mozart's manuscript or Bach's manuscript or Schoenberg's or Bartók's, whatever it may be. Right now, we all have the chance to get very close to a manuscript of Beethoven. And Beethoven is probably the composer that is more known, more important to, more loved by the greatest number of people that we can imagine for a composer of classical music. And yet, if you look at the printed music, generation after generation of printed music, and you compare it to the manuscript as we're about to do, you are going to find that there's very different information in those two things. And what you're looking at right now is a screen that points out one of the enormous differences. When you read printed music, there are 5 or 6 dynamics that we encounter. Triple forte, double forte, forte, piano, 2 pianos, 3 pianos. Well, when you read the manuscripts, something emerges which is quite startling. And I have to admit, at first you don't see it. At first you see special markings, and it's as if they just represent the normal thing. But what it boils down to is a 20-level system of dynamics. Now, let's just start at the loudest one that's the most obvious. This is 3 fortes, so this means the loudest thing you can imagine, super loud. Well, what happens as you go down from that is Beethoven has a special distinct marking. He takes the word fortissimo and he keeps the FF, that means is normally very loud, 2 Fs, but he retains the last 2 letters, so FFMO. And what you'll find in the manuscripts is that he uses that when something is extremely important, when it has a special significance, a special intensity. If it's just normal kind of loudness, then it's the next level, just FF. Now, the next dynamic down from that is forte, but what one finds in the manuscripts is that there's a very clear delineation of different importance to different parts. And it results in this. Sometimes, when it's very, very important, he writes out the whole word forte, F-O-R-T-E. If it's a little less important, he writes out 3 letters of it, so F-O-R. If it's yet 1 level down in intensity, he just does F-O. And yet, back to the sort of normal level, we have what we're used to and what we normally see in music, which is just F. Then there are a few things where the words describe what's happening. We have poco forte, so a little bit forte. Mezzo forte, so kind of half of forte. Mezzo piano, which is a little less than mezzo forte probably, but it's related to the softer dynamic, piano, or a P. In Italy still today, you'll hear people go piano, piano, piano when they want things to be calm or quiet. And well, that's what the word does in music too. So here is piano, just 1 P. Now this is where it gets totally surprising. And this is where it's even more surprising that as you spend more time with it, it's completely systematic. And it's a system which has shown up everywhere in music that I've certainly studied between 1802 and 1826. So that's 24 years where this system is in evidence for Beethoven. And that is piano with 1 underline. So that's an underline on the stem. Then we have piano with 2 underlines. So 2 underlines on the stem. So that's already 3 levels for piano. Well, then we move to the next one where there's 2 Ps, so that's softer. So that's pianissimo, and that's the way we normally see it in printed music, is P, P, 2 letter Ps. Well, indeed, for Beethoven, he then clarifies. He delineates something even more refined by taking those 2 Ps and putting 1 underline on the stems. Well, the next one is 2 Ps with 2 underlines on the stem. Now you remember back here for very, very important sections we had the FFMO. Well, now we have the counterpart. This is PP, and it's also PPMO, same thing. Pianissimo, he takes the last 2 letters and puts them next to the 2 letter Ps. That again is for sections where there is a rarefied mood, something very, very intense which is happening in the music, and that is where PPMO is used. Well, it goes further. Now we have 3 Ps, so this is getting now incredibly soft. And indeed, then he extends it further in the same logic. He has 3 Ps with 1 underline and 3 Ps with 2 underlines.
Nick, it's interesting to notice in this that scholars have frequently talked about how Beethoven expanded the dynamics one notch to the top and one notch to the bottom. So people will say that Beethoven went from the fortissimo to fortissimo, and how he went from the pianissimo to the triple piano. But I think what this reveals is that not only was he interested in expanding the spectrum, but he was interested very much in the gradations in between. That was really important to him, and the emotional message that all these gradations can associate with the music.
That's right, and it's a little bit of a danger that we love the memories that we have of the heroic music of Beethoven, and this in general is loud. And so there's a tendency to think that he's somehow moody and loud and angry. But this kind of tells a different story, because obviously he's interested in many more gradations on the soft side than he is on the loud side. And I think that tells you a lot about the internal qualities which build the strength of expression that shows up so gloriously in those loud parts. In some funny sense, he's earning the ability to say something glorious in such a memorable way by the extreme subtlety with which he treats all the dynamic levels. Now, that's not all that has been surprising in the manuscripts. When we encounter printed music, a lot of times we have something called a staccato, which can be either a little dot, so it's like a round little dot, or sometimes it looks kind of like a triangle, and we call it a wedge. Well, we know from letters that Beethoven got very mad when people would not notice the difference between a dot and a line staccato, or this longer form of staccato. And that's for a long time made us aware that, oh, he must have had two things in mind, this dot and then this one longer thing. What has become more clear, again, spending many hours rehearsing from the manuscripts and continuing to study and encounter piece after piece after piece, is I think that Beethoven, in fact, had 4 levels of staccato. There was a dot, where it's just a very small, round mark. Then there's a short line staccato, which is extremely close to the dot, but it does have a little length to it. Then there's a medium line staccato, where it's a bit longer. And then there's a longer one, where it really has a noticeable length. Now, this happens to be in one piece of music. This is 3 bars of Opus 59, number 1, where the energy diminishes as we play. Maybe I'll just play it for you so you get a sense of it. So what's happening is the different staccatos are telling us a different energy level that brings the music down in energy. Now, it would be very easy to look at something like this and think, oh, that's just an accident of the way the pen fell. But as you look at more of them, you realize they also tend to be consistent within their grouping. And in fact, this is a marking which combines the dot with a slur. So there's a slur, but we connect it with our bow. So it has a little attack, but the slur brings those attacks together. And Beethoven, when he marks portato, which is very often, is extremely careful that these are always nice, beautifully formed little dots. And there you see it. There you see it. It's extremely careful. So why should we then assume that these are going to be very careless and that their length doesn't have any meaning? Well, we could have a lot of different thoughts about that. But I did find one example that pointed yet a new direction. This is Beethoven's 3rd piano sonata, so Opus 2, number 3. And in it, the piano builds up to a very loud dynamic and arrives on these chords. And there are 8 chords printed here, and this is copper plate engraving from the first edition, the Artaria edition. And there are 8 notes with a quite long staccato, this long version here. Now, then there are 4 notes very scrupulously printed with a medium staccato. Then there are 4 notes with a small line staccato. And indeed, it goes on, and here we have a nicely formed dot in the bass. Now, you can't print that by accident. And I have to infer from this a story where early on, Beethoven was determined that he would try to get these distinctions printed. And I do think it's reasonable to assume that the printers found this an unreasonable request, and that he did in fact give up on it. Well, just to explain a little bit that often this kind of dot, the smallest dot, will very often be short, so we really will perceive it as very short, delicate notes. This is a passage from Leopold Mozart, the father of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Now, if you notice, there's a great big slur here. And on that slur, there are 9 line staccatos. Now, if the line staccato was referring to a short note, and particularly telling you that it was meant to be short, well, this marking would make absolutely no sense at all. However, if the longer line staccato is a kind of accent, that makes a lot of sense. So in this case, Leopold Mozart means little bits of energy. And so when we bring that over to a detached texture, it is going to be a very short note, but it's going to have a whole different level of energy. And in fact, that works very beautifully when we observe in the manuscripts. It can be loud and it can be soft. But what Beethoven is telling us is that that marking has a voltage. It has a kind of high intensity, and that the longer that staccato is, the more intensity there is to that attack. Now, the third thing that shows in the manuscript, which is virtually invisible in all printed music, is something that gets called a hairpin, which is a sort of a strange term, but sometimes it's called swell marks. And you see they go up. There's a sort of, that's why they get called hairpins. They look a little like a hairpin. They go up and they go down. Well, do you notice that these are 4 of them that are connected, very carefully connected, so that there's no break. The up and the down connect, and then the other side does the same. We've come to call these diamonds. And then here, this happens to be from the same page of Opus 132. Here we have in a quartet texture 4 times the expressive marks separated. You see? Again, very carefully drawn so that there is separation between them. That's the way it's normally printed in the music that we're familiar with. Now, what do these mean, and why on earth would he make this distinction? Well, in terms of their meaning, this is one of those funny things. This is the piano part to the Archduke Trio. And this particular part of the music, I'm playing it on the violin, but I'll just so you understand it. The piano goes. And as I played it on the violin, you might have noticed a kind of surge of vibrato at this moment that we see this diamond. Well, the piano hammer strikes its string. How on earth is it going to make a crescendo or change the vibrato? Well, it can't. But if we look at this marking and we see it as an instruction to feel a surge in intensity, well, then that makes perfect sense. And in fact, that's something a pianist can very easily do and very easily convey. And indeed, I think this whole set of markings we've come now to read it much more as a direct instruction of espressivo, to increase the sense of expression internally, which may make it louder and then get softer, but the important instruction is that it is a burst or a surge of expression. In this case, I think it's a surge of expression up, which is distinct from the surge or the release of expression that goes down. They're two distinct events, whereas this is one event. Now, all of these things that we've just showed you are not things that you can see in printed music. And it's very understandable that whether it was at the time Beethoven was encountering publishers with the new music, or if it's in the current time, all of these things are quite challenging to make choices about how to print them. But as we spend more time with these, I think it is becoming clear that these distinctions are very purposeful, give us vivid information about how to play, and we are going to investigate how to bring that information to students and those that study this music. These videos are one attempt to share that with you, and along with it, to share the palpable energy of what it feels like to look at those pages that were 2 feet from one of the greatest brains that's ever worked in music in all of history. And that brain was putting every bit of effort he could on making that page the most meaningful thing he could possibly make it. Well, we're going to share in that energy, and we're going to look at some of the details that come out when you're that close to the pen of Beethoven. Now we're going to listen to the whole movement. We picked this movement because it's one of the very shortest movements, only 2 minutes long. It's written at the end of Beethoven's life when his technique is developed to just a level which is hard to imagine. Both the detail and control of the way he could handle each element of the music, and yet the freedom and boldness of the way he could express his ideas. You're about to hear that 2 minutes in a performance by the Borromeo String Quartet. And what we've done here is we've created a kind of a timeline, and just want to introduce this to you before you listen to the whole movement.
It must be said that Beethoven's handwriting, even though extremely detailed, is not the neatest one. So the first time one looks at this, it's a little bit difficult to follow the manuscript. For this reason, this timeline, you can think of it as a map of the piece. And it consists of 2 components. The top part is what we call a spectrograph. And you can think of a spectrograph as something that shows the evolution of sound in time. So one very neat thing about the spectrograph is that it can show you how much energy sound has at every moment. And also it presents the work for you almost as a piece of architecture, as you can see everything opening up in time.
Now, Stratis, if I'm not mistaken, when we're looking at this, very literally, when someone sees these towers, as it were, of color going up, what you're seeing is this is low pitches down here, and then as we go up here, these are high pitches. Now, sometimes those are the actually pitches that the instrument plays, but sometimes there's so much sound put in motion that what you're actually hearing is overtones. But all of that together is the sort of commotion that's created by this part of the music. So this might be very soft, a very low part, and this would be a very high, very intense part.
And right below that, in this level, you can see a waveform of the actual music, and that is literally a representation of the loudness, how loud the passage gets. Underneath, you see a whole bunch of descriptive things that may seem a little bit funny, but these are some of the peculiar things that we encountered in this particular manuscript. And our job, now that you have been exposed to these elements, is to put them in context, because after all, Beethoven's music is incredibly coherent. So we know that the expressive palette of Beethoven is much bigger than perhaps than we previously thought, but how is it really organized? So that's what we are going to attempt to figure out in the next few videos.
And now when you see this map, you're about to hear the music. What you're going to hear is one set of music, that's why we have scherzo here and a line here, of a certain type. And then that returns, that's why it says scherzo return. So it's a little like when a building has two symmetrical sides. And so there's a sameness there. And then in between, just like that middle of the building, this is something totally different. This is the trio. Now in this case, it's much more energetic and much more virtuoso, much louder. And then something called a coda, which in Italian actually does mean tail, and it's a way of closing the movement, finishing the movement. So let's now listen to the performance, and this is what you're going to perceive, this short section, this quite energetic middle section, a transition back, the scherzo return, and then the coda. And as far as each of these marks, when we come back after you hear the performance, we're going to start to explain how these map and how Beethoven's very clear indications are like signposts that mark out this remarkable and beautiful architecture.